beliefs can influence attitudes, author Nell Money tells the following true story. He writes, a number of years ago, in the San Francisco Bay Area, some educators decided to conduct an experiment. They called 3 teachers together and told them that they had been selected because they were the brightest and most capable teachers in the school system. They also told them that for the coming year, they had been assigned 90 of the most advanced and academically gifted students in the area. And the administrator said, "We want you teachers to move these students through the school year at their own pace to see how much they will outperform the rest of the school system. Because of their higher IQs, we know they will progress more quickly, but we would like to measure their achievement relative to the other students." The 3 teachers and the 90 students had a fantastic school year. After all, the teachers had the opportunity to work with the very best students, and the students had the very best teachers. At the end of the year, the students had achieved 20 to 30% above the average of students in the whole region. At that point, the teachers were called in, and the principal said to them, "I have a confession to make. Your students were actually not the most intellectually gifted. They were chosen entirely at random, so they were really just an average sampling of students." The teachers responded by saying, "So the students performed so well because they had the best teachers." And the principal added, "Well, actually, I have another confession to make. You were not chosen because you are the brightest and most capable. Actually, your names were chosen out of a hat." Concludes the author. Of course, what the students and teachers had not known was that the experiment was not about IQ, intelligence quotient, but rather AQ, attitude quotient, the measure of how we see ourselves and our world. And as the experiment dramatically proved, we may not be able to greatly affect our IQ, but we can definitely develop our AQ, and in this, have a profound impact on the whole outcome of our lives. Developing our AQ, our attitude quotient, our perspective on life. This is a crucial step in becoming the joyful, victorious, truly blessed people God longs for us to be. This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today, in our continuing study of the Apostles, we turn our attention to Philip. Philip being one of the earliest members of the group, following the brothers Andrew and Peter, whom we've already considered, and then also the brothers James and John, who we will consider over the next couple of weeks. All of whom apparently lived in the same region. However, we're not sure if Philip shared the others' profession as fishermen, or even what his pre-apostleship profession was at all. About his later life, there's also some confusion. All traditions hold that he eventually became a missionary in the region of Greece. However, here the endings of his life diverge. Some hold that he was eventually martyred for his faith by crucifixion. Others hold that he lived till a ripe old age and that his ministry was actually continued by his 4 daughters. Whatever, all we really know about Philip comes from his appearance in just a handful of gospel scenes, bringing his friend Nathanael to Jesus in John 1, assisting Andrew in bringing some Greeks to meet Jesus in John 12. In both of these scenes, as we've noted in the past, demonstrating, as with Andrew, the central task of evangelism for the follower of Christ. Philip then also appears in John 14 as one of those to ask a question of Jesus during the Last Supper. And finally, in what I believe is the most telling scene of all about his nature and his personality, we find Philip being tested by Jesus in John 6, which is our text for today. Our text this morning is the familiar miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, and in John's version of it, it begins with a mob coming to Jesus and Jesus posing a question of Philip, namely, where are we to come up with food for this great crowd? Jesus poses this question, however, as the text makes clear, he already knows his answer, he knows what he's going to do. That is, he's not really looking for a solution, he has a solution. Rather, he's looking to test Philip, to see if Philip knows what to do. This is a test to see how Philip will handle a difficult situation. Essentially, Jesus has asked him, okay, you're confronted with a major problem, how do you handle it? What is your approach? Well, unfortunately, as we see, Philip fails this test. His answer? It's hopeless, Lord. It's impossible. Even if we had 6 months' wages, we couldn't buy enough food for all these people. Like a lot of church folk facing some great obstacle ever since, Philip basically just tosses his hands in the air and sees no way through this. Rather than defeat the problem, Philip is defeated by it. And note the great irony of this. Philip is defeated by this problem while victory over it stands right next to him, but he misses Philip demonstrates the defeatist lifestyle, a negative, pessimistic lifestyle we also often slip into. The person who perhaps, despite their faith, despite even the nearness to Jesus Christ, consistently gets steamrollered by life, run over, crushed, beaten, defeated because of a bad attitude. A life that Jesus obviously doesn't want for us and can lift us beyond. The real test here is one of attitude. How are you approaching life? How are you looking at things? The point Jesus is trying to make, don't go through life with a defeatist attitude. Tremendous victory is right around you. Live a joyful, upbeat approach to life and watch what happens. And this is what I would have us consider this morning. What do we learn here about making this happen in our own lives? That is, what is the right answer to Jesus' question to Philip? How does one develop the kind of good attitude that results in a life of victory over life's obstacles as God intends, rather than our being defeated by them? A couple of thoughts. The three most basic qualities of those who possess a high attitude quotient. First, people with a good attitude focus on what they have, not what they lack. Notice where Philip's entire approach to the problem begins, and sadly ultimately ends. The only thing he mentions, his whole answer to Jesus' question is simply that they don't have enough resources to handle the problem before them. And that there's seemingly no way they could ever possibly come up with such resources. Now, his statement is undoubtedly true. Even 6 months' wages couldn't possibly buy enough food for this great crowd. But notice that that's all that he's focused on is he only looks at what they don't have. It is a classic case of the pessimistic statement of the obvious that does nothing. It's like the old saying, some people see the glass as half full, some people see the glass as half empty, but there are some folks so negative that either way, all they see is a glass that needs to be cleaned. Only able to see what's wrong. We don't see what we have, Well, Andrew chimes in and notes that there are actually some resources that they do have, 5 loaves and 2 fish. Although even this, as he observes, is nowhere near enough. Andrew's trying to put a little bit of better spin on things, but he doesn't do that much better. I guess that, if Philip gets an F on this test, Andrew gets maybe like a D- or something. Of course, what do we eventually see in the story? That these meager resources actually are enough to cope with this seemingly overwhelming situation, and then some. So they're leftovers to this. Even better, though, why, how are these meager resources more than able to cope with the problem before them? That is, what else do they have going for them that makes this all work in such a miraculous way? Simple. They have Jesus, right? It's not that they have nothing. They have some resources, and ultimately they have Jesus, the ultimate resource. But you see, Philip is oblivious to this. He's blind to it. He is defeated by his problem first because he only focuses on what he lacks, not what he has. And this points us to the first step in becoming victorious in life. Simply, don't focus on what you lack. Focus on what you do have. Ask, always, what are the blessings in my life? The people, the resources. What are the good things I have going for me in my life? Not just the bad. People who have the kind of good attitude that leads to victorious living first focus simply on what they have and not what they lack. One preacher puts it this way. He writes, I love the story I once heard of a second grader named Mike. On the way to school, Mike's arm bumped against the seat on the bus and it made a big scrape, and it bled until blood got all over his clothes. Earlier, he had forgotten to put his homework paper in his book bag, so when he got to school, he got in trouble. At recess, he was hit in the mouth by a ball and lost 2 teeth. After school, he slipped on the ice and he broke his wrist. On the way to the hospital, he reached into his pocket with his good hand and pulled something out. And his father asked him what it was. He said, it's a quarter, 25 cents. I found it on the ground when I fell down. It's the most money I've ever found. This is the best day of my life. Get your life focused on what you have. True story. There once was a college co-ed who was facing 2 problems common to most students, namely low grades and no money. Well, she had to communicate both of these things to her parents, and she knew they would be very upset and have trouble understanding. And after considerable thought, she came up with the following creative approach to address the problems she was having. She wrote her parents a letter that read, Dear Mom and Dad, just thought I'd drop you a note to clue you in on what's been happening here at school. I've fallen in love with a guy named Jim. He quit high school after 10th grade to get married. But a year ago, he got a divorce. He's been arrested a few times, doesn't have a job because he doesn't like to work, And he spends whatever money he does get on alcohol and online gambling. But trust me, he's really a good guy. We've been going steady for 2 months and plan to get married in the fall. Until then, I decided to move into his apartment. I think I may be pregnant. At any rate, I dropped out of school last week, although I hope to finish school sometime in the future. Love, your daughter. On the next page, she continued. P.S. Dear Mom and Dad, I just want you to know that everything I've written so far in this letter is false. None of it is true. But Mom and Dad, it is true that I got a D in French and I flunked math. And it is true that I'm going to need some more money for my tuition payments. I just started off the way I did because I thought you'd take it better if I could help you see what you do have going for you, even though it isn't much. Love, your daughter. And believe it or not, the girl is still alive. Are we looking at what we have going for us? You know, keep yourself from being defeated and overcome by life by doing whatever it takes to keep your life on what you have going for you, even if sometimes it's not much, you know? People who possess the good attitude that leads to victorious living first focus on what they have and not what they lack. Secondly, then, they are people who seek to grow in their faith. Of course, as mentioned, this whole scene is primarily about a test of faith. Jesus is feeding the masses, but he's also testing Philip's faith. Philip has some faith, but is it enough? Does he have as much as he needs, as much as Jesus wants for him and for all of us to be able to overcome, you know, the obstacles of life? It's a test of faith. And in the end, what we see is that Philip's faith is forced to grow. He's confronted with possibilities beyond his current thinking. He's exposed to a reality far deeper than his current spirituality. In this problem, he's given the possibility, the encouragement of changing his thinking, of expanding his faith, of being a different and better and greater person. And it's the same thing for all of us in any difficult situation. And this, you see, points us to the second basic quality of those upbeat people who are victorious rather than defeated by life. They don't just seek to get through their problems, to fix them, to just survive them. No. The victorious seek always to grow, to have the struggles and problems of life push them, to expand their thinking, to change them and to better them. Not just to come through, but to come through different as God would have them be. You know, it's kind of like the really old, tired joke, you know, about the signs that were seen posted around one neighborhood one time some years ago. Signs that read, "Reward offered for lost dog. Dog has only 3 legs. Is blind in left eye. Missing right ear. Tail broken and has been recently neutered. Answers to the name of Lucky." Sorry. But do we see ourselves as lucky even in the hardships? Because tough times can bring out the best in us. Is this how we're approaching the problems of our lives? One author writes, back in the mid-1980s, Christian author Amy Grant's life was discovered to be not quite as charming as it appeared. Troubles in her marriage, her husband Carrie's cocaine habit, and their subsequent talk of divorce left Amy in one of her darkest moments. She remembers, "For a few days I just stayed in bed and mourned my life. The only hope I could see was just junking it all, moving to Europe and starting my career all over again. It was then that my sister, in a last-ditch visit, marched up right beside my bed and said, 'Fine, go to Europe, leave it all behind, run away, start your life all over again. But before you go, I want you to tell my little girl, your niece, how you can sing all the time that Jesus can help her through anything in her life, but that he couldn't help you.'" And Grant concludes, the words really hit home. "I realized how much of what I've been singing and saying I didn't really believe, didn't really trust. I decided to stay and to work on my problems, and I am so glad I did, because I found God like I never had before." Upbeat, victorious people secondly seek to grow in their faith, to be pushed by God in and through their hardships. All of which leads us to finally, third, victorious people see opportunities and not obstacles. Preacher John Ortberg writes, "Many years ago I was walking in Newport Beach in Southern California with 2 friends. The 2 of us were on staff together at a church, and one was an elder at the same church. We walked past a bar where a fight had been going on inside, and the fight had spilled out into the street, just like an old Western. Several guys were beating up on another guy, and he was bleeding from the forehead. We knew we had to do something, so we went over to break up the fight. I don't think we were very intimidating. All we did was walk over and say, 'Hey, you guys, cut it out.' It didn't do much good. Then all of a sudden, they looked at us with fear in their eyes. The guys who had been beating up on the one guy stopped and started to slink away. I didn't know why until we turned around and looked behind us. Out of the bar had come the biggest man I think I had ever seen. He was something like 6 feet, 7 inches, maybe 300 pounds, maybe only 2% body fat. The guy was huge. We called him Bubba, although not to his face, but afterwards when we talked about it. Bubba didn't say a word. He just stood there and flexed his muscles. You could tell he was hoping they would try to have a go at him. All of a sudden, my attitude was transformed, and I said to those guys, "You better not let us catch you coming around here again, you hear?" I was a different person because I had great big Bubba behind me. I was ready to confront with resolve and firmness. I was released from anxiety and fear. I was filled with boldness and confidence. I was ready to help somebody that needed helping. I was ready to right all the wrongs of the world. Why? Because I had great big Bubba. I was convinced that I was not alone. I was safe. If I were convinced that Bubba were with me 24 hours a day, I would have a fundamentally different approach to my life. If I knew Bubba was behind me all day long, you wouldn't want to mess with me. But he's not. I can't count on Bubba. But then again, as the writers of Scripture continually remind us, we do have a power even greater than Bubba's standing behind us always, the power of God Almighty. He's always there to back us up. We do go into every situation with power far beyond our own. We only need to claim it and to start living it. Being invited to claim the power of God that is with us in every single situation. This is finally what's ultimately going on in our text today. In the end, as the story began with Jesus looking out over the crowd before him, it seems he recognized a tremendous opportunity, a chance to reach out, to serve, to give, and to reveal the glory of God. It's a great moment. And in effect, in his question, he invites Philip and the rest of the disciples to share in this, to be part of this great thing. However, finally, what does Philip seem to see instead? He doesn't seem to see a great opportunity, no. Quite the opposite. As his answer reflects, he sees only a huge obstacle, an impossible task, an overwhelming demand being asked of him. Each views the situation very differently. However, in the end, who, of course, is the one who overcomes the situation rather than is overcome by it? Final mistake that Philip makes and that we too often make in our own lives. Seeing every problem only as an obstacle to be overcome, a demand, a hindrance to life, rather than as an opportunity for greater life, an opportunity for something phenomenal to happen, an opportunity for God to be at work, for a miracle to happen, an opportunity for us to be in ministry for the Lord and to change the world. Someone once said that in every problem there is an opportunity waiting to get out. The trick to life is not to do the hard work of fixing the problem, but simply the easy work of releasing the opportunities. Are we approaching our lives as obstacles? Hoops to be jumped through, tasks to be accomplished, demands to be fulfilled? Or as an upbeat, optimistic, joyful people, are we seeing our lives as opportunities for something phenomenal to take place? Opportunities for God to be at work in and through us. Opportunities for us to be in ministry for the Lord and for the Lord to work something phenomenal in our world. Preacher James Hewitt writes, "There once was a man who was involved in a tragic accident. Paralyzed, the only muscle control that remained was in his right hand, but he still possessed a brilliant mind, enriched with a good education, broadened by world travel. His first thought was that there was nothing he could do now but remain a helpless sufferer. But he didn't want to just give up, so he prayed to God to show him some way that his life could still be of use. Shortly thereafter, a thought came to him. It was always nice to receive letters, but why not write them? He could still use his right hand with some difficulty, but to whom would he write? Was there anyone shut in and incapacitated like he was who could be encouraged by his letters? He then thought of people in prison. They did have some hope of release, whereas he had none, but it was worth a try. He wrote to a Christian organization concerned with prison ministry. He was told his letters could not be answered because it was against prison rules, but he still decided to commence this one-sided correspondence of encouragement anyway. He wrote twice a week, and it taxed his strength to the limit. But into the letters he put his whole soul, all his experience, all his faith, all his humor, and all his Christian optimism. Frequently he felt discouraged and was tempted to give it all up. In fact, after a number of years of this, with no replies, having not received even the slightest hint of whether all this effort was doing anything at all, he was ready to give up. He figured his life really was useless now after all. But then one day, he got a letter in reply. It was very short, written on prison stationery by the officer whose job it was to censor the mail. All it said was, "Dear sir, please write on the best paper you can afford. Your letters are passed from cell to cell until they literally fall to pieces." And the man joyfully took up pen and paper again and faithfully continued this ministry for the rest of his life. Mark Twain once said, "Make a point to develop a positive attitude. It may not solve all your problems, but it will annoy enough people to make it worth the effort." The lesson of Philip: develop your attitude quotient. Become the joyful, upbeat, optimistic person God wants you to be, victorious over life's obstacles rather than defeated by them. Focus on what you have, not what you lack. Seek to grow in faith and see opportunities, not obstacles. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 451, "Be Thou My Vision." Would you please stand?